I decided to make a surprise visit to our beach house. The new caretaker blocked the gate and laughed when I introduced myself. "Ma'am, stop lying. The boss's wife is inside with him right now." He pointed to the garden, and I finally realized who it was. That's when I smiled, adjusted my sunglasses, and decided to play along. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached." I had been looking forward to this surprise visit to our beach house for weeks. After 38 years of marriage, Spencer and I had developed a comfortable routine, but lately, something felt different about him. Distant, secretive, always checking his phone, taking calls in another room, claiming work emergencies that seemed to happen more and more frequently. At 64, I wasn't naive about the realities of long marriages. I had friends whose husbands had wandered, and I had always prided myself on knowing Spencer better than anyone. We had built something solid together, weathered storms that would have broken weaker couples. But these past few months, an uncomfortable feeling had been growing in the pit of my stomach, a whisper I kept trying to silence. So when Spencer announced another last-minute business trip to Seattle, something inside me snapped. Instead of my usual understanding nod, I decided to drive down to our beach house in Carmel. Maybe I needed some time alone, some ocean air to clear my head. Or maybe, deep down, I already suspected what I might find. The 3-hour drive from San Francisco gave me time to think, to watch the coastline unfold and remember happier times. Spencer and I had bought the beach house 15 years ago, back when his architectural firm was thriving and my interior design business was taking off. It had been our sanctuary, our weekend escape from the city's demands. The house sat on a bluff overlooking the Pacific, a sprawling modern structure that Spencer had designed himself. Floor-to-ceiling windows, clean lines, a deck that seemed to float above the waves. I had chosen every piece of furniture, every fabric, every detail that made it feel like home. It was ours in a way that our city house, inherited from Spencer's family, never quite was. As I turned onto the private drive that led to our property, I felt that familiar surge of peace that came with arriving at the beach house. The late afternoon sun painted everything golden, and I could already hear the distant crash of waves below the bluff. But my peace shattered the moment I reached our gate. A young man I didn't recognize stood blocking the entrance, his arms crossed over his muscled chest. He looked to be in his 30s, with the kind of deep tan that spoke of outdoor work, and the confident stance of someone who knew exactly where he belonged. I rolled down my window, assuming Spencer had hired new security without mentioning it. "Excuse me, I need to get through to my house." The man laughed, actually laughed, as if I had just told him the most amusing joke. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to move along. This is private property." "Yes, I know it's private property. It's my property." I kept my voice calm, though irritation was beginning to build. "I'm Lorene Hartwell. This is my beach house." His laughter grew louder, and he slapped his thigh like I was performing in some comedy show. "Ma'am, please, stop lying. The boss's wife is already inside with him right now." He gestured toward the house with obvious amusement. "Nice try, though. You're not the first person to try this trick." My heart stopped. The boss's wife. Spencer was inside with his wife. But I was his wife. I followed the direction of his pointing finger, and that's when I saw her. A woman with long auburn hair was visible through the living room's massive windows, moving around my kitchen like she owned it. Even from this distance, I could see she was younger than me, probably in her 40s, wearing one of those flowing white sundresses that looked effortless and expensive. The woman moved with complete familiarity through my space, opening cabinets that I had organized, touching things that belonged to me, and then Spencer appeared beside her, his arm sliding around her waist with an intimacy that made my stomach clench. I had found my husband with another woman in our home, and somehow, I was the one being treated like an intruder. The young man was still talking, still finding my presence hilarious. "Look, lady, I don't know what game you're playing, but Mr. Hartwell and his wife Amelie are having a private weekend. They specifically asked not to be disturbed. Amelie, Even her name sounded young and fresh and nothing like Lorene. Something shifted inside me in that moment. The shock, the hurt, the humiliation, it all crystallized into something else. Something sharper. I looked at this young man who was so confident in his knowledge of who belonged in my house, who was so amused by what he saw as my desperate lie, and I made a decision. "Oh my goodness," I said, letting embarrassment color my voice. "I'm so sorry. You're absolutely right." I fumbled in my purse, buying time to think. "I'm actually looking for work. I heard Mrs. Hartwell might need help with the house, and I thought I'd stop by. I guess I got confused about which house was which." The man's demeanor changed immediately. The mockery faded, replaced by something approaching sympathy. "Oh, well, that's different. I'm Darius, by the way. I'm the new caretaker here." He extended his hand through my car window. "What kind of work are you looking for?" "Housekeeping, cooking, general help," I said, the lie flowing more easily than I expected. "I have excellent references. I've been working for wealthy families in the area for years." Darius nodded thoughtfully. "You know what? They might actually need someone. Mrs. Hartwell was just saying how much work it is to maintain a place this size." He glanced back at the house. "Why don't you come back tomorrow morning? I'll mention it to them tonight." "That would be wonderful," I said, already planning my return. "What time would be good?" "Come around 9. They usually have breakfast on the deck, and Mrs. Hartwell likes to plan her day early." Mrs. Hartwell. This woman was living my life, sleeping in my bed, eating breakfast on my deck, and everyone around her was calling her by my name. I thanked Darius and drove away, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I made it about a mile down the coastal highway before I had to pull over. The reality of what I had just discovered hit me like a physical blow, and I found myself gripping the steering wheel and sobbing. Spencer wasn't just having an affair. He was living a completely different life. One where I didn't exist at all. This woman, Amelie, wasn't just visiting our beach house. She was inhabiting it, claiming it, being treated as if she belonged there more than I did. But as the tears subsided and the sun began to set over the Pacific, I realized something else. I had been handed an opportunity. Tomorrow, I would walk into my own house as a stranger. I would see exactly what my husband's real life looked like when he thought I wasn't watching, and then I would decide what to do about it. The drive back to the city passed in a blur of planning. I would need to look different tomorrow, dress down, maybe change my hair. I would need a story, references, a background that would hold up under casual scrutiny. Most importantly, I would need to prepare myself for whatever I might discover. Because something told me that what I had seen today was just the beginning. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Amelie moving through my kitchen, Spencer's arm around her waist, Darius laughing at me like I was some delusional stranger. By 5 a.m, I gave up on sleep and started preparing for what might be the most important performance of my life. I had spent hours the night before creating my disguise. Nothing dramatic. I wasn't trying to fool Spencer. Just his new life. I pulled my shoulder-length silver hair back into a simple bun, chose my most conservative clothes, and put on the kind of sensible shoes I hadn't worn in years. In the mirror, I looked like exactly what I was pretending to be. A woman who needed work and was grateful for any opportunity. The drive back to Carmel felt surreal. I was returning to my own home as an applicant for a job in my own house. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so devastating. Darius was waiting at the gate when I arrived at exactly 9 o'clock. He greeted me with a friendly wave and walked me up to the front door, the same door I had walked through hundreds of times, usually loaded down with groceries or weekend bags or flowers from our city garden. "Mrs. Hartwell is having her coffee on the deck," Darius said as we approached the house. "She's really excited to meet you. I told her you had great experience with families like theirs." Families like theirs. In my own house. The interior of the beach house looked different somehow, though I couldn't immediately pinpoint why. Small changes, subtle shifts that spoke of another woman's presence, a different arrangement of pillows on the sofa I had chosen, books I didn't recognize on the coffee table, a vase of lilies where I always kept roses. But it was more than the physical changes. There was an energy in the house that felt foreign to me, as if the very walls had forgotten who their real owner was. Darius led me through the living room toward the deck, and I caught my breath. Through the sliding glass doors, I could see them clearly for the first time. Spencer sat at our outdoor dining table, reading what looked like architectural plans. He wore the navy polo shirt I had bought him for his birthday last year, and his gray hair was tousled in that way that meant he had just woken up. He looked relaxed, content, completely at ease, and beside him sat Amelie. Up close, she was even more striking than I had realized. She looked to be in her early 40s, with that kind of effortless beauty that didn't require much makeup or elaborate styling. Her auburn hair caught the morning light, and she moved with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing you're exactly where you belong. She was wearing one of my silk robes. The sight of it hit me like a physical blow. That robe had been an anniversary gift from Spencer 3 years ago, bought during a trip to Italy. I had treasures it, worn it on special mornings, lazy Sunday breakfasts, quiet evenings when we wanted to feel elegant even in our private moments. Now this woman was wearing it like it had always been hers. "Mrs. Hartwell," Darius called out as we stepped onto the deck. "This is the woman I mentioned. She's looking for housekeeping work." Amelie looked up with a brilliant smile that seemed genuinely warm. "How wonderful! Please sit down. Would you like some coffee?" I sat at my own patio table, looking at my own view of the Pacific, being offered coffee by a woman wearing my robe in my house. "That would be lovely, thank you." Spencer glanced up briefly from his plans, gave me the kind of polite nod he might offer any service person, and returned to his work. No recognition, no concern. I was completely invisible to him, just part of the background of his new life. "I'm Amelie," the woman said, pouring coffee from the pot I had bought at a pottery shop in Mendocino. "And this is my husband, Spencer." Her voice carried a slight southern accent that made everything sound musical. "Darius tells me you have experience with houses like this one." "My husband." She said it so naturally, with such casual ownership, that I almost corrected her before catching myself. "Yes, ma'am. I've been working for families in Carmel and Monterey for about 20 years. The lie came easily now. I specialize in maintaining luxury properties, especially ones with ocean exposure. The salt air can be tough on furnishings and fixtures. I should know. I had spent 15 years learning how to protect this house from the elements." Amelie nodded enthusiastically. "That's exactly what we need. This house requires so much attention, and I want everything to be perfect." She gestured around the deck with obvious pride. "Spencer designed it himself, you know. He's an architect." "I know," I wanted to say. "I lived through every phase of construction, every late-night revision, every moment of his obsession with getting the angles just right to capture the morning light. It's beautiful," I said instead. "He has excellent taste." Spencer looked up at the compliment, finally focusing on me for a moment. "Thank you. It's taken years to get it exactly right." He glanced at Amelie with obvious affection. "My wife has been instrumental in making it feel like home." "My wife?" The words felt like individual knife wounds. Amelie beamed at him, then turned back to me. "We're here most weekends now, and I'm hoping to spend even more time here soon. Spencer's business is doing so well that he might be able to work remotely more often." I almost laughed at the absurdity. Spencer's business was doing well because I had helped build it, had managed the finances and marketing for years while he focused on design. Now this woman was casually discussing my husband's success, as if she had played any role in creating it. "What would you need me to do?" I asked, forcing my voice to remain professional. "Everything, really," Amelie said with a light laugh. "Cleaning, laundry, meal preparation when we're here, maybe some grocery shopping, organizing, general maintenance of the house's condition." She paused, considering. "Would you be available to live in during the weeks when we're here? There's a small apartment above the garage that we could make available." "Live in." She wanted me to live in my own house as her employee. "I could make that work," I heard myself saying. "Wonderful." Emily clapped her hands together like a delighted child. When could you start? Immediately, if you need me to. Spencer looked up again, and for a terrifying moment, I thought he might recognize me. But his gaze passed over me with the same indifference he might show a piece of furniture. Sounds good, he said absently. Darius can show you around, help you get settled. And just like that, I was hired to work in my own house for my husband and his mistress. The next hour passed in a surreal tour of my own home. Darius showed me the layout as if I had never seen it before, explaining where things were kept, how various systems worked, what Spencer and Amelie's preferences were. Mr. Hartwell likes his coffee strong, and Mrs. Hartwell prefers tea in the afternoons. He told me as we stood in my kitchen. They usually eat breakfast on the deck when the weather's nice. Mrs. Hartwell is trying to eat healthier, so lots of fresh fruit and vegetables. I nodded and took mental notes, learning about my husband's life as if I were a stranger, which apparently I was. The guest apartment above the garage had been Spencer's office during construction, then a storage space for beach equipment. Now it had been converted into basic living quarters. A bed, a small kitchenette, a bathroom with a shower. It was clean and functional, but painfully impersonal. Mrs. Hartwell had this set up last month, Darius explained. She said they might need live-in help eventually. So this had been planned. Amelie had been preparing for a housekeeper, preparing to establish herself more permanently in what she clearly saw as her home. It's perfect, I told Darius, looking around the small space that would now be my home while strangers lived in my real home below. As evening approached and I settled into the guest apartment, I found myself staring out the small window at the house below. I could see Spencer and Amelie through the dining room windows, sharing dinner at the table where I had celebrated birthdays, anniversaries, quiet Sunday mornings. They looked happy, comfortable, like a couple who belonged together. And I was watching it all from the outside, like some ghost of my own life. But as I prepared for bed in this strange exile, I realized something important. I wasn't just watching anymore. I was inside their world now, invisible, but present. I would see everything, hear everything, learn exactly what my husband's real life looked like. Tomorrow, I would start cleaning my own house for another woman. I would wash my husband's clothes for him to wear on dates with his mistress. I would prepare meals in my kitchen for people who had stolen my life. But I would also be gathering information, watching, learning, and eventually, when I knew everything there was to know about their perfect little charade, I would decide exactly how to destroy it. I had been living in my own house as a stranger for 2 weeks when I overheard the conversation that changed everything. What I had initially thought was a simple affair, devastating as it was, turned out to be something far more sinister. The routine I had fallen into was both comforting and torturous. Every morning I would wake in the small apartment above the garage and prepare to serve the people who had stolen my life. I made their coffee, prepared their meals, cleaned their messes, and listened to their casual conversations about a future that apparently didn't include my existence. Spencer had fallen completely into the role of Amelie's devoted husband. He brought her flowers, kissed her goodbye when he left for his supposed business meetings, held her hand during their evening walks on the beach. If I didn't know better, I would have believed they were genuinely in love, but I was starting to notice things that didn't quite fit. Amelie received frequent phone calls that she always took in private, stepping out onto the far end of the deck or into the bedroom when her phone rang. Spencer often worked late into the night on projects that seemed to have nothing to do with his architectural firm. And sometimes, when they thought I was out of earshot, their conversations took on an intensity that seemed at odds with their public affection. It was a Thursday morning when everything fell apart. I was in the laundry room, folding clothes that Spencer had worn during romantic dinners with his mistress, when I heard raised voices from the bedroom. The laundry room shared a wall with the master suite, and the ocean breeze had blown their window open. "You promised me it would be finished by now," Amelie was saying, her voice sharp with frustration. "I've been playing house for months, Spencer. Months." "These things take time," Spencer replied, but there was tension in his voice I had rarely heard before. "We have to be careful. One mistake and everything falls apart. I'm tired of being careful. I'm tired of pretending to be the loving wife for your little shows. When is she going to be completely out of the picture? My hands stilled on the shirt I was folding. They were talking about me. Soon, Spencer said. The papers are almost ready. Once they're filed, Lorene will be legally declared dead, and we can move forward with everything. The shirt slipped from my hands. Legally declared dead. They weren't just planning to divorce me or steal my assets. They were planning to erase me from existence entirely. How much longer? Emily pressed, because I'm getting real tired of this charade. Living in her house, wearing her clothes, pretending to be grateful for her furniture and her decorations. It's creepy, Spencer. Just a few more weeks, Spencer said. The life insurance money will come through once the death certificate is processed. Then we can sell this place, sell the city house, liquidate everything. We'll have more than enough to start fresh somewhere else. Life insurance money. They had taken out a policy on my life and were planning to collect it. And you're sure about the boat? Emily asked. No one will ever find it? The boat went down in international waters during that storm 3 months ago, Spencer said matter-of-factly. Tragic accident. Lorene always was a terrible sailor, never should have gone out alone. By the time anyone realizes she's missing, there won't be anything left to find. I gripped the edge of the laundry table to keep from falling. 3 months ago. The weekend Spencer had told me he needed to go to a conference in Los Angeles. The weekend I had planned to surprise him at the beach house but changed my mind at the last minute because of a terrible headache. They had been planning this for months. They had expected me to be dead already. I still think we should have just done it clean, Amelie was saying. Made it look like an accident here at the house. All this elaborate planning with boats and storms. This way is safer, Spencer interrupted. No investigation, no questions about who might have wanted to hurt her. Just a middle-aged woman who made a bad decision to go sailing alone. And if someone gets suspicious? If they start asking questions about where she is? Who's going to ask? Spencer's voice was cold, matter-of-fact. Lorene doesn't have any close friends. Her sister lives in Europe and they barely talk. Her business associates will assume she's taking time off after the tragedy. By the time anyone thinks to look for her, we'll be long gone. I realized with horror that he was right. In the past few years, I had let most of my friendships fade, focused so completely on our marriage and my work that I had isolated myself without realizing it. Spencer had encouraged that isolation, I now understood, had praised me for being so dedicated, so focused on our life together. He had been preparing for this for years. What about the housekeeper? Emily asked, and my blood turned to ice. She's been here every day. What if she starts asking questions? What questions could she possibly ask? Spencer laughed, and the sound made my skin crawl. She's a domestic worker, Emily. She cleans and cooks and minds her own business. Besides, once we're gone, she'll just find another job. People like that don't get involved in their employers' personal lives. People like that. As if I were some subhuman species incapable of curiosity or concern. I suppose, Emily said, though she sounded unconvinced. But I don't like having her around. She's always watching, always listening. Sometimes I catch her looking at things like she recognizes them. You're being paranoid, Spencer said. She's probably just admiring the house. These people dream of living in places like this. These people. I had shared a bed with this man for 38 years, and he spoke about working-class people like they were a different species. Maybe, Emily said, but I'll be glad when we can get rid of her. Soon, Spencer promised. Once the insurance money comes through and we're ready to leave, we'll pay her off and send her away. She'll never know what happened here. Their voices grew quieter, moving away from the window, and I realized they were probably embracing, comforting each other after their planning session about my murder. I stood in that laundry room, surrounded by the domestic detritus of their fake life, and tried to process what I had just learned. This wasn't just an affair. This wasn't even just about stealing my assets. They had planned to kill me, to make it look like an accident, and to walk away with everything I had worked for. The only reason I was still alive was because I had gotten a headache 3 months ago. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely fold the remaining clothes. I needed to get out of the house, needed to think, needed to figure out what to do with this information. But as I gathered the laundry and prepared to leave the room, I heard Spencer's voice again, closer to the window. "Did you remember to call Marcus about the boat disposal?" he was asking. "Already done," Emily replied. "He'll have it completely dismantled by the end of the week. No evidence it ever existed." Marcus. They had accomplices. This wasn't just Spencer and Emily acting alone. They had help. Professionals who knew how to make evidence disappear. And the documentation for her final sailing trip? Perfect. Credit card receipts for fuel, marina records, even a witness who saw a woman matching Lorraine's description leaving the harbor alone that morning. Emily's voice held a note of pride. If anyone ever investigates, they'll find a clear trail leading to a tragic accident. They had created an entire false history of my final days. Somewhere in their files were documents showing that I had rented a boat, bought fuel, sailed out into dangerous waters during a storm. Someone had been paid to lie about seeing me that day. "You've thought of everything," Spencer said with obvious admiration. "I learned from the best," Emily replied, and there was something in her tone that made me pause. "Rebecca was different," Spencer said quietly. "That was messier." Rebecca. Who was Rebecca? At least with Rebecca, we didn't have to wait months for the insurance investigation, Emily said. Car accidents are so much simpler to stage. Car accidents, insurance investigations. They had done this before. Rebecca was impatient, Spencer said. She wanted to move too fast, take too many risks. You're smarter than that. I gripped the door frame, my legs suddenly weak. Spencer wasn't just planning to kill me. He was a serial killer, a man who seduced women, married them, then murdered them for their money. And Amelie wasn't his latest victim. She was his partner. How many others? I whispered to myself, then realized with terror that I had spoken aloud. But they were moving away from the window again, their voices fading as they went deeper into the bedroom. I didn't think they had heard me, but I couldn't be sure. I finished my tasks on autopilot, my mind racing with the implications of what I had discovered. Spencer wasn't just my cheating husband. He was a calculating murderer who had been planning my death for months, maybe years. And I was trapped in my own house with him, disguised as a servant, completely at his mercy if he ever realized who I was. That evening, as I served them dinner on the deck, I watched their faces in the candlelight and saw them clearly for the first time. Spencer, the man I had loved and trusted for nearly 4 decades, was a monster who saw me as nothing more than a financial opportunity. And Amelie, with her warm smiles and gracious manners, was his willing accomplice in murder. They ate their meal and made pleasant conversation about their plans for the weekend, while I stood nearby refilling their wine glasses and planning how to stay alive long enough to expose them. Because now I knew the truth. And the truth was so much worse than I had ever imagined. After discovering Spencer and Amelie's plan to murder me, I knew I had to act fast. But I also knew I had to be smart about it. Going to the police with a story about overhearing my supposedly dead husband planning my murder while disguised as his housekeeper would sound like the ravings of a madwoman. I needed proof. Hard evidence that would be impossible to dismiss or explain away. The next morning, I began my investigation in earnest. While Spencer was in the shower and Amelie took her usual morning walk on the beach, I slipped into their bedroom and searched through Spencer's briefcase. My hands shook as I rifled through architectural plans and business documents, looking for anything that might connect him to insurance fraud or the mysterious Rebecca they had mentioned. What I found was worse than I had imagined. Buried beneath legitimate architectural contracts was a manila folder labeled Personal Insurance Matters. Inside were life insurance policies, not just mine, but 3 others. Rebecca Martinez, age 42, Diane Thornfield, age 51, Susan Walsh, age 48. 3 women, all around middle age, all with substantial life insurance policies listing Spencer as the beneficiary. And according to the dates on the death certificates also tucked into the folder, all 3 had died within the past 8 years. Rebecca Martinez had died in a car accident in Oregon 5 years ago. Diane Thornfield had drowned in a sailing accident off the coast of Santa Barbara 3 years ago. Susan Walsh had died in a house fire in Colorado 2 years ago. All accidents, all involving wives of Spencer Hartwell, architectural consultant, who had collected substantial life insurance payouts after their tragic, untimely deaths. My husband wasn't just planning to kill me. He was a serial killer who had been murdering wives for money for years. With trembling hands, I used my phone to photograph every document in the folder. The insurance policies, the death certificates, bank records showing the insurance payouts being deposited into accounts in Spencer's name. Everything that proved his pattern of murder. But as I was photographing the last document, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Spencer was getting out of the shower earlier than usual. I quickly shoved the papers back into the folder, making sure everything was in the exact order I had found it, and slipped out of the bedroom just as Spencer emerged from the bathroom, a towel around his waist. "Oh, excuse me, Mr. Hartwell," I said, grabbing a spray bottle from my cleaning supplies. "I was just going to dust the bedroom, but I can come back later." "No problem," he said absently, not really looking at me. "Just give me 10 minutes to get dressed." I retreated to the hallway, my heart pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. I had the evidence I needed, but I also realized how much danger I was in. If Spencer ever suspected what I had discovered, I wouldn't live long enough to use it. Over the next few days, I continued gathering evidence with the methodical precision of someone whose life depended on it. Because it did. I discovered that Amelie had her own folder hidden in the bedroom closet, tucked inside a shoebox behind her summer clothes. This folder contained what appeared to be detailed dossiers on Spencer's previous wives, including photographs, financial information, and personal details that would have taken months of surveillance to gather. Rebecca Martinez had been a successful real estate agent with no close family and a substantial investment portfolio. Diane Thornfield had been a divorced financial advisor with a teenage daughter who lived with her ex-husband. Susan Walsh had been a widow with grown children who lived across the country. The pattern was clear. Spencer targeted middle-aged women with money, but limited family connections. Women who wouldn't be missed immediately, whose deaths wouldn't generate intensive investigations. And at the bottom of Amelie's folder was a dossier on me. Seeing my own life reduced to bullet points on a target assessment was surreal and terrifying. Laureen Hartwell, age 64, interior designer, estimated net worth $1.2 million. No children, sister lives in London, limited social connections. Husband reports she has become increasingly reclusive in recent years. Increasingly reclusive. Spencer had been isolating me systematically, encouraging me to decline social invitations, to focus on our marriage instead of maintaining friendships. I had thought he was being romantic, wanting to spend more time together. Instead, he had been preparing me for murder. But the most chilling discovery was Amelie's own background. According to documents I found in her personal files, her real name was Amanda Kellerman, and she had a criminal record going back 15 years. Fraud, identity theft, conspiracy. She wasn't just Spencer's latest wife, she was a professional con artist who specialized in insurance scams. The two of them were a team, predators who had been working together to systematically murder wealthy women for their money. I also discovered their immediate plans. Among Spencer's papers was a detailed timeline for my death. According to their schedule, I was supposed to have died 3 months ago during a sailing accident. My memorial service had already been planned, scheduled for next month to give time for the insurance investigation to conclude. But what terrified me most was finding their backup plan. If the sailing accident couldn't be arranged, they had alternative scenarios ready. A hiking accident on one of my favorite trails. A home invasion at our city house. Even a medical emergency that could be induced with untraceable drugs. They weren't going to give up. If I didn't disappear soon, they would find another way to kill me. I photographed everything, uploading the images to a secure cloud storage account I created under a false name. But I knew that evidence alone wouldn't be enough. I needed to catch them in the act, get them to confess their crimes in a way that could be recorded and verified. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. On Friday evening, Spencer received a phone call that agitated him visibly. I was serving dinner when his phone rang, and I watched his face change from relaxed contentment to sharp concern. "When?" he said tersely. "How much does she know?" He listened for several minutes, his jaw tightening with each passing second. Finally, he hung up and turned to Amelie with an expression I had never seen before. Pure, calculating rage. "We have a problem," he said quietly. "What kind of problem?" Amelie set down her fork, immediately alert. That was Marcus. Someone's been asking questions about Rebecca Martinez's death. Her daughter hired a private investigator. Rebecca's daughter, the teenage girl who had been living with her father when her mother died. She was older now, old enough to start questioning the convenient timing of her mother's death. "How much does the investigator know?" Amelie asked. "Too much. He's connected Rebecca to Diane, and he's starting to ask questions about my involvement with both of them." Spencer ran his hands through his hair. "We need to move up our timeline." "Move it up how much?" Amelie's voice was steady, but I could see tension in her shoulders. "We finish this weekend," Spencer said. "We can't wait for the insurance declaration anymore. We stage Lorene's accident now, tonight, and then we disappear. Tonight. They were planning to kill me tonight." I forced myself to continue serving their meal as if I hadn't heard anything, but inside I was screaming. All my evidence gathering, all my careful planning, none of it would matter if I didn't survive the next few hours. "What about the housekeeper?" Amelie glanced in my direction. "We'll have to include her," Spencer said matter-of-factly. "Make it look like they were both in the wrong place at the wrong time. Home invasion gone wrong, maybe. Or a gas leak explosion. Include her." He was planning to kill me twice, once as Lorene Hartwell, his wife, and once as Margaret Chen, the housekeeper who had been unfortunate enough to witness something she shouldn't have. I finished serving their dinner and retreated to the kitchen, my mind racing. I had hours, maybe less, before they put their plan into action. I needed to get evidence of their immediate plan, something that would prove they were about to commit murder. As they finished eating and moved to the living room for after-dinner drinks, I slipped my phone into recording mode and found a position where I could hear their conversation clearly. "So what's the plan?" Amelie was asking. "How do we stage it so both of them are taken care of?" "Gas leak," Spencer said without hesitation. "I'll disconnect the line to the stove, let gas build up in the kitchen overnight. In the morning, when the housekeeper comes in to make coffee, any spark will set off an explosion. Both bodies will be found together. Tragic accident. No survivors to tell a different story. And we'll be where? Already on the road to Mexico. I've got new identities ready. Cash reserves in offshore accounts. By the time the fire department finishes investigating, we'll be somewhere with no extradition treaties. What about the investigation into Rebecca? Won't matter once we're gone. Let them investigate all they want. There won't be anyone left to prosecute. I had it. A recorded confession to their plan to murder me and frame it as an accident. But I also realized that I was running out of time. Once they went to bed, Spencer would disconnect the gas line, and by morning, this house would be a crater and I would be dead. I couldn't run. They would notice if I disappeared, and they would know their plan had been compromised. I couldn't call the police from the house. They would hear me. But I had one advantage they didn't know about. I wasn't just Margaret Chen, the housekeeper who happened to overhear their plan. I was Lorene Hartwell, the woman they thought they had already killed. And unlike his previous victims, I knew exactly who Spencer really was and what he was planning to do. Tomorrow, if I survived the night, I would stop being a victim and start being a predator. Tonight, I had to make sure I lived long enough to destroy them both. I had 6 hours until dawn. 6 hours before Spencer would disconnect the gas line and turn my own house into my tomb. 6 hours to orchestrate the most important performance of my life. After retreating to the guest apartment above the garage, I spent the first hour uploading all my evidence to multiple cloud storage accounts and emailing copies to myself at various addresses. If something went wrong, if I didn't survive the night, at least there would be a record of what Spencer and Amelie had done. But I didn't intend to die tonight. Instead, I was going to give them exactly what they wanted. with a twist they would never see coming. At 2 in the morning, I crept out of the apartment and made my way to the main house. Spencer and Amelie were asleep in my bedroom, probably dreaming about the new life they would start after my murder. The house was dark, except for the soft glow of emergency lighting along the hallways. I knew every inch of this house, every creaking floorboard, every door that squeaked. I had lived here for 15 years, and now that intimate knowledge was going to save my life. My first stop was Spencer's home office, where he kept his backup files and emergency documents. I knew his filing system better than he did. I had organized it myself years ago. In the bottom drawer of his desk, behind folders of old tax returns, I found what I was looking for, a thick envelope labeled Emergency Protocols. Inside were new identities for both Spencer and Amelie, complete with passports, birth certificates, and social security cards. Spencer would become Robert Hamilton, architectural consultant. Amelie would become Sarah Hamilton, his devoted wife. They even had matching wedding rings tucked into the envelope, ready to replace the ones they wore now. But more importantly, I found their escape route. Detailed directions to a private airstrip 40 miles inland, where a plane would be waiting at 6 in the morning to take them to Mexico. From there, they would travel to Costa Rica, where Spencer apparently owned a villa under one of his false identities. They had been planning this escape for months, maybe years. Every detail had been considered, every contingency planned for, except one. They had never planned for their victim to fight back. I photographed the documents and returned them to exactly where I had found them. Then I made my way to the kitchen, where Spencer planned to disconnect the gas line in a few hours. But I had a different plan. Working by the light of my phone's flashlight, I carefully examined the gas connections behind the stove. Spencer's plan was simple but effective. Disconnect the line, let gas build up overnight, and wait for the first spark in the morning to cause an explosion that would destroy all evidence of his crimes. Instead, I did something he would never expect. I loosened the connection just enough to create a small leak, not enough to cause an explosion, but enough to trigger the gas detection system I had installed 2 years ago after a neighbor's house had suffered a gas leak. Spencer had complained about the expense at the time, calling it unnecessary paranoia. Tonight, my paranoia would save my life. The detector would start sounding its alarm around 5 in the morning, giving me time to discover the leak and save Spencer and Amelie from a tragic accident. I would be the hero, not the victim. But that was only the first part of my plan. Next, I made my way to Spencer's car, parked in the circular driveway. Using skills I had learned during a brief rebellious period in college, I carefully disabled his engine in a way that would seem like a mechanical failure rather than sabotage. When Spencer tried to leave for the airstrip in the morning, his car wouldn't start. Then I called the one person I knew I could trust, Detective Sarah Morrison of the Monterey County Sheriff's Office. Sarah and I had become friends years ago when her department was investigating a burglary at one of my design projects. We had stayed in touch, and I knew she would listen to me, even at 3 in the morning. "Sarah," I whispered when she answered her phone. "I need your help. I'm about to stop a murder." "Lorene, Jesus, what time is it? Are you okay?" "I'm fine, but I won't be for much longer. I need you to trust me and do exactly what I ask, without questions." I gave her the abbreviated version. My husband was planning to kill me for insurance money. I had evidence of multiple previous murders, and they were planning to stage my death as a gas leak explosion this morning. "Where are you now?" Sarah's voice was instantly alert, all traces of sleep gone. "I'm at my beach house in Carmel." "But Sarah, you can't come here yet. I need to catch them in the act, get them to confess while you're listening. Otherwise, they'll just claim I'm a delusional woman making up stories about her husband. Lorene, this is too dangerous. If they're really planning to kill you, they think they already killed me," I interrupted. "They don't know I'm alive. That's my advantage." I explained my plan quickly. Sarah would position herself and her team outside the house at 5:30, just before the gas alarm was set to go off. I would record everything on my phone while she listened in through a conference call. When Spencer and Amelie revealed their plan or tried to stop me from saving them, Sarah would have probable cause to arrest them. "This is insane," Sarah said, but I could hear her writing notes. But if you're right about the previous murders, I'm right. I have all the evidence. Life insurance policies, death certificates, even their planned escape route. But I need them to incriminate themselves with you listening. Okay. But Lorene, if anything goes wrong, if you feel like you're in immediate danger, you run. Don't try to be a hero. Too late for that, I said. I've been a victim for 38 years without knowing it. Tonight, that ends. After hanging up with Sarah, I spent the remaining hours before dawn preparing for the confrontation that would either free me or kill me. I reviewed my evidence one final time, practiced what I would say to trigger Spencer and Amelie into revealing their plan, and wrote a final letter to my sister in London, just in case. At 5 in the morning, I was back in the guest apartment, fully dressed and waiting. At 5:15, I called Sarah and put her on speakerphone, then muted my end of the call so she could hear everything that was about to happen. At 5:27, the gas detector began its piercing wail. I waited exactly 3 minutes, long enough for Spencer and Amelie to wake up and start panicking, before I burst through the main house's front door like a concerned employee responding to an emergency. "Mr. Hartwell! Mrs. Hartwell!" I shouted as I ran toward their bedroom. "There's a gas leak! We need to evacuate immediately!" I found them in the hallway, Spencer pulling on clothes while Amelie stood frozen in her nightgown, her face pale with what looked like genuine terror. "What's happening?" Spencer demanded. "Gas leak in the kitchen," I said breathlessly. "The alarm woke me up. We need to get out of the house right now before it explodes." I started shepherding them toward the front door, but Spencer suddenly stopped. "Wait," he said, his expression changing. "How did you know to check the kitchen?" "The alarm system shows which sensor triggered the alert," I lied smoothly. "Come on, we need to leave now." But Spencer wasn't moving. Instead, he was staring at me with a look I had never seen before. Suspicious, calculating, dangerous. "Amelie," he said quietly, never taking his eyes off me, "doesn't this seem convenient to you? A gas leak? The night before we're supposed to leave?" Amelie looked between us, confusion evident on her face. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying maybe our housekeeper knows more than she's been letting on." The gas alarm continued its shrill warning, but Spencer seemed oblivious to the danger. All his attention was focused on me, and I could see the exact moment when suspicion crystallized into certainty. "You know what I think?" he said, stepping closer to me. "I think you've been listening to conversations you shouldn't have heard. I think you know exactly who we are and what we're planning. Mr. Hartwell, we really need to evacuate," I said, but my voice sounded strained even to my own ears. "No," Spencer said, his voice deadly calm. "I think we need to have a conversation first. About who you really are and what you think you're going to do with whatever you think you know." The mask was slipping. The charming, sophisticated architect was disappearing, revealing the cold-blooded killer underneath. "Spencer, what are you doing?" Amelie demanded. "The house could explode." "The house isn't going to explode," Spencer said, still staring at me. "Because there isn't really a gas leak, is there? You disconnected the alarm system and triggered a false alert." He was wrong about the method, but right about my intention. And now I was trapped in a room with 2 killers who knew I was a threat to them. "I think," Spencer continued, "it's time you told us who you really are. Because I'm starting to suspect that Margaret Chen isn't your real name." This was it. The moment I had been planning for. The moment when everything would either fall into place or fall apart completely. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and looked Spencer Hartwell directly in the eyes. "You're right," I said quietly. "Margaret Chen isn't my real name." Spencer smiled triumphantly, but his expression changed to confusion when I continued. "My real name is Lorene Hartwell, and you're my husband." The silence that followed was broken only by the continued wailing of the gas alarm. Spencer's face went white, then red, then white again. Amelie gasped and took a step backward. "That's impossible," Spencer whispered. "Lorene is dead." "No," I said, allowing all my rage and pain to show in my voice. "Lorene was supposed to be dead. But your plan failed, Spencer. I'm very much alive, and I know everything." Spencer's hand moved toward his pocket, and I realized he might be carrying a weapon, but before he could act, Amelie grabbed his arm. "Spencer, the gas," she hissed. "If she's telling the truth about who she is, then she really did trigger a gas leak. We need to get out of here." "She's lying," Spencer snarled. "She's just some crazy woman who's been spying on us." "Really?" I said. "Then how do I know about Rebecca Martinez? How do I know about Diane Thornfield and Susan Walsh? How do I know about your planned escape to Costa Rica this morning?" Spencer's face crumpled with the realization that I did indeed know everything. "You've been busy," he said slowly. "But it doesn't matter. You're still going to die tonight. We'll just have to make it look like you tried to blackmail us and things went wrong." "No," I said firmly. "I'm not going to die tonight. But your plan is." I held up my phone, showing that it was recording. "Everything you've said in the past 10 minutes has been recorded and transmitted to Detective Sarah Morrison of the Monterey County Sheriff's Office. She and her team are positioned outside this house right now, waiting for my signal." Spencer lunged for my phone, but I was ready for him. I dodged backward, and he stumbled into the wall. "Sarah," I called out to my phone. "Now would be good." Within seconds, I could hear car doors slamming outside, followed by heavy footsteps on the front porch. "Monterey County Sheriff's Office, open the door." Spencer looked around wildly, like a trapped animal seeking escape. Amelie had sunk to the floor, her hands over her face. "It's over," I told them both. "All of it. Rebecca, Diane, Susan, they're all going to get justice now." The front door burst open, and Sarah Morrison entered with 3 other officers, weapons drawn. "Spencer Hartwell, Amanda Kellerman, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder and insurance fraud," Sarah announced. As the officers handcuffed Spencer and Amelie, Spencer looked at me with pure hatred. "You think you've won?" he spat. "You have no idea what you've started. There are others involved in this, people who won't let you destroy everything we've built. Let them come," I said calmly. "I'm not afraid anymore." And for the first time in months, maybe years, that was completely true. 6 months later, I stood in the courtroom listening to the judge read Spencer's sentence. 3 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole for the murders of Rebecca Martinez, Diane Thornfield, and Susan Walsh, plus an additional 25 years for conspiracy to commit murder and insurance fraud. Amelie, who had agreed to testify against Spencer in exchange for a reduced sentence, received 20 years. She would be 62 when she was released, assuming she lived that long. Prison was not kind to women who preyed on other women. The families of Spencer's victims were in the courtroom that day. Rebecca's daughter, now 22, had driven down from Oregon. Diane's sister had flown in from New York. Susan's son had taken time off from his job in Denver. They all thanked me afterward, with tears in their eyes, for giving them the closure they had never thought possible. "My mother always said something felt wrong about that car accident," Rebecca's daughter told me. "Thank you for proving she was right." I accepted their gratitude, but I knew the truth. I hadn't set out to get justice for those women. I had stumbled into it while trying to save my own life. But sometimes the best justice comes from the most unexpected places. The trial had been a media sensation, naturally. Husband's murder plot foiled by wife's secret investigation had been featured on every major news program. I had turned down interview requests and book deals, wanting nothing more than to disappear from public attention and rebuild my life in peace. The beach house had been sold within a month of Spencer's arrest. I couldn't bear to live there anymore, not after everything that had happened within those walls. Every room held memories of watching my husband plan my murder, of serving dinner to the people who wanted me dead. Instead, I had bought a small cottage in Mendocino, overlooking the ocean but far from the scene of my near destruction. It was simpler than the beach house, more authentic somehow. A place where I could be myself without the weight of Spencer's expectations and manipulations. I had also changed my name legally, not to something completely different, but to Laureen Margaret Hartwell, incorporating the identity I had assumed during those terrifying weeks as a housekeeper in my own home. Margaret Chen had been brave in a way that Laureen Hartwell had never been. She had fought back, taken risks, refused to be a victim. I wanted to honor that strength. My interior design business had initially suffered from the publicity surrounding the trial. Some clients were uncomfortable with the association, worried that hiring me would bring unwanted attention, but others were drawn to the story of a woman who had fought back against impossible odds. My client base had shifted, but it had also grown stronger, filled with people who understood survival and resilience. I was working on a project for one such client, a women's shelter that needed help creating spaces that felt safe and nurturing rather than institutional, when Detective Sarah Morrison called with news I had been both expecting and dreading. "We found Marcus," she said without preamble. "Spencer's contact, the one who helped dispose of evidence. He was arrested in Tijuana trying to cross into Guatemala. Marcus Reyes had been Spencer's connection to the criminal underworld, the man who arranged for boats to disappear, witnesses to be paid off, evidence to vanish without a trace. His arrest meant that Spencer and Amelie's entire network was finally being unraveled. He's talking," Sarah continued, "giving us details about other cases, other people Spencer worked with. It looks like your husband was part of something much bigger than we initially realized." I wasn't surprised. Spencer had always been a planner, someone who thought 10 steps ahead. It made sense that he would have built connections with other criminals, other people who could help him carry out his schemes. "How many others?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. "At least 6 more women over the past 15 years. Maybe more as we dig deeper." Marcus kept records, photographs, details about each case. He saw it as insurance, leverage he could use if Spencer ever tried to cut him out. 6 more women, 6 more families who had lost mothers, daughters, sisters to Spencer's greed. 6 more cases where justice had been delayed but not denied. "Will you testify if we need you to?" Sarah asked. "Of course," I said without hesitation. "Whatever you need." After hanging up, I sat in my cottage's kitchen, drinking tea and watching the sunset paint the ocean in shades of gold and crimson. I thought about those 6 women, about the lives they should have lived, the families they should have had. I thought about Rebecca and Diane and Susan, whose voices had finally been heard. And I thought about the woman I had been before that day at the beach house, the woman who had trusted completely, who had never questioned Spencer's late-night phone calls or sudden business trips or gradual isolation of her from friends and family. That woman was gone, as surely as if Spencer had succeeded in his plan to kill her. In her place was someone harder, more suspicious, but also more alive. Someone who knew that survival sometimes required deception, that love could be a weapon, and that the people who claimed to protect you were sometimes the ones you needed protection from. The cottage felt peaceful in the gathering dusk. I had furnished it myself, choosing pieces that reflected my own taste rather than what would impress others. Nothing matched perfectly, but everything belonged. It was a home built for one person's comfort rather than a showcase designed to demonstrate wealth and status. I had learned to live alone without being lonely. I had learned to trust my instincts instead of dismissing them. I had learned that being careful wasn't the same as being paranoid, and that protecting yourself wasn't the same as being selfish. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. For a moment, my old paranoia flared. Could Spencer's criminal associates be trying to intimidate me? But when I opened it, I found a message from Rebecca Martinez's daughter. "Hi, Mrs. Hartwell. I wanted to let you know that we're having a memorial service for my mom next month to celebrate her life instead of mourning her death. Would you like to come? She would have wanted to thank you herself." I stared at the message for a long time, tears blurring my vision. In saving my own life, I had given those families something precious, the truth about what had happened to their loved ones. I had given them someone to hold accountable, someone to blame, someone to see punished for the crimes committed against their families. But more than that, I had given them proof that their instincts had been right. Rebecca's daughter had always suspected her mother's death wasn't really an accident. Diane's sister had questioned why her sister would go sailing alone during a storm. Susan's son had wondered why his mother's house fire had started in a room she never used. They had all doubted the official stories, but they had been told they were being paranoid. that they were looking for someone to blame because they couldn't accept that accidents sometimes happen to good people. Now they knew they had been right to doubt, right to question, right to believe that something was wrong, even when everyone else told them to accept what had happened and move on. I typed back my response. I would be honored to attend. That evening, as I prepared for bed in my small cottage, I caught sight of myself in the bathroom mirror. The face looking back at me was different from the one I had seen 6 months ago. Older, yes, but also stronger, more defined. The soft, accommodating features I had worn for so many years had been replaced by something sharper, more determined. I looked like a woman who had survived something terrible and come out stronger on the other side. I looked like someone Spencer Hartwell would never have been able to manipulate or control. I looked like someone who would never again mistake isolation for love, or control for protection, or manipulation for care. I looked like myself, finally and completely myself, for the first time in 38 years. Outside my bedroom window, I could hear the ocean waves rolling against the shore, endless and rhythmic and peaceful. The sound that had once been the backdrop to my planned murder was now the soundtrack to my freedom. Spencer was in prison, where he would die. Amelie was in prison, paying for her role in the deaths of innocent women. Marcus and the other members of their criminal network were being hunted down and arrested one by one. And I was here, in my own home, living my own life, free from the fear and manipulation that had defined my existence for so long. Tomorrow, I would continue building my new life. I would work on projects that mattered, spend time with people who valued me for who I really was, and make decisions based on my own needs and desires rather than someone else's expectations. Tomorrow, I would continue being Laureen Margaret Hartwell, survivor and fighter, the woman who had refused to let evil win. But tonight, for the first time and longer than I could remember, I would sleep peacefully, knowing that I was safe, that I was free, and that I had won. The game was over, and I was the only one left standing. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.